Lawyers of Reddit, what was the most disturbing case you were faced with? And listeners, please remember to like and subscribe. Shortly after I started practicing, I was asked to assist a partner with a case involving a man killed in a bar fight. We were representing the bar owner in a lawsuit bought by the descendant's family. The bar in question is an upscale brew pub in a nice part of town. It's not the kind of place where fights break out. The guy who was killed went out that evening with some friends and his sister. They bar hopped for a while and ended up at our client's place. That night, there was a big group of fraternity guys out celebrating someone's 21st birthday. So they were all loud and quite drunk. One of the guy's friends got into it with one of the fraternity guys, and then all hell broke loose. This bar only serves draft beer, so glasses started flying everywhere in the fight, and most people hid under the tables or behind the bar. The guy tried to pull his friend out of the fight and get the heck out of there, but somewhere in the chaos, the guy had his throat cut. This didn't look like a little cut from some flying glass. It looked like someone attacked him with a knife. I can still picture his autopsy photos. He wound up dying in front of the bar with his sister right there. She was truly heartbroken over the whole thing, and the guy who died had a young son too. Aside from the autopsy photos and the devastated family, the truly disturbing thing about the case is that everyone knows who the killer was, but there never was enough evidence to prosecute him. We hired a private investigator who interviewed a bunch of fraternity guys and their friends. It turns out everyone who was there had a good idea who cut the guy, but no one actually saw him do it. Supposedly, the fraternity brothers got together that night and swore they would never talk about it, but it was the worst kept secret on campus. Our investigator was certain as to the killer's identity, and I imagine the police knew as well, but no one could prove it. It's frightening that someone can just kill another human being in cold blood and get away with it. As for our client, it's tough to hold a bar owner liable for something like this. There are laws that hold bar owners liable if, for instance, they continue serving someone who is clearly drunk and allow that person to drive home and harm someone else on the way. The bar owner could also be held liable if the place is prone to violence and they don't take steps to prevent it, but in our case, none of the stuff really applied. We were able to get the case dismissed on a summary judgment, and I think we wound up settling on appeal for a small amount. It was a victory for our client, but the whole thing just sucked. First case I ever tried went like this. A 48-year-old man had gone to a drinking in the woods party with a bunch of teenagers. After some hearty drinking, he spots a 12-year-old passed out because she had drunk a 750 of Bacardi. So he pees on her face. For a long while. How long? Well, before going to the party, he had a little to drink. How much? Oh, just a few beers. How many? Oh, maybe 30? Such was his testimony, which was delivered while he wore a muscle t-shirt with a skull on it and the text bonehead. You can't make this stuff up. And obviously, he went to prison. So, yeah. I do employment law for Uncle Sam. There are so many messed up stories. First one is a woman bought a tape recorder on a date with a coworker. Taped her entirely consensual naughty encounter with a coworker. Tried to use the tape of evidence of naughty harassment. She was partly successful. The coworker was transferred and she got some money to go away. The second one is a federal cop claims he was fired in retaliation for whistleblowing about the misuse of a government vehicle. All his co-workers claim it was because he had took out his gun and pointed it at the phone when angry with the person on the line. The cop claims they all made up the story to cover for someone else misusing the vehicle. The third story. A woman repeatedly slapped her coworker with a ruler while he was on a conference call with his boss. She was angry because he had joked about that she was late, even though everyone knows she's first in the office. They were non-law enforcement, but their boss was a special agent in charge, and he refused to officially discipline her because she might challenge it. SACs typically spend their days throwing violent criminal gangs into prison, but he feared an adamant person with a ruler. Law enforcement supervisor appears drunk on job and often acts strangely. Subordinate officer gets into his office, reads his medical records detailing a struggle with depression and antidepressant medication, and photocopies these notes to show the supervisor. She can't understand why she's not considered a whistleblower. Government scientist is angry that a co-worker wears too much perfume. Discovers perfume lady has a phobia of fish. She chases a screaming, cursing perfume lady around the office with a dried fish. There were assault charges filed by both parties. The federal judge was very upset at time wasted in fish perfume dispute. This happened when I was working in a firm many moons ago. A group of our clients were suing their landlords because he went into their apartments, changed the locks, and evicted them for no reason, then proceeded to steal most of their stuff. Then the landlord had his goons dump the rest of their stuff on the street. He then sued them for eviction and perjured himself in court about damage done to the property and the amount of rent they owed. He also never served them when he filed the complaints, because he somehow figured it so that he could use a friend as a process server. The friend would then lie about serving them. The end result was that he got massive default judgments against these people and got to keep a bunch of their stuff. When we searched through the court records, we found that he had filed at least 100 lawsuits like this since the early 90s. It was the most enraging thing I've ever encountered. These people have lost everything. Having to call a 9-year-old as a witness to testify about how her father molested her when she was 7. We did so much prep with the child, social workers, her mom, and so on. I had DVDs of forensic interviews where she made a full admission. She was ready to put it all out there about her father touched her privates and made her pleasure him, how splooshy came out of his weehoo, etc. I get her on the stand and she denies everything. I rephrase the questions as much as I possibly can. Still nothing. The shithead father is smiling at the counsel table the whole time. We lost. Maybe the guy didn't do it. I'll never know. That was a tough day. A federal judge called up a senior associate at my firm a few years ago and asked us to take on a case for a pro se plaintiff, also known as a guy representing himself. The judge's personal rule, and it's a good one, is that a pro se plaintiff gets past summary judgment. He finds them pro bono attorneys. Long story short, it means the facts have been disclosed and there is at least a question of who's right. We look at the case applying the time-honored principle of, don't turn down a federal judge when he asks a favor, idiot. The guy was the plaintiff who was suing some cops, the town and the county. Our client had led the cops on a high-speed chase through a fairly dense town, and he went to jail for 6 to 10 years for it. What he was suing for, though, was that the cops used excessive force on him when he was arrested. No matter the crime, once the cops have you controlled, they can't just start kicking the poo out of you when you're in handcuffs. So, not a sympathetic case, but you get used to this. Your goal is just to make sure they get everything the law entitles them to. Then, our first interview, 2 disturbing factors came up. When going through his life history, he mentions that one day in his youth, he was on drugs and kicked out of his class in college. Angry, he goes into the parking lot, finds a girl standing by her car, and sexually assaults her. Yep, our client is a sexual assaulter. He spent 10 years in jail for that. Now, obviously, sexual assaulters can be unfairly treated 15 years later, and everyone deserves equal protection under the law. But yeah, it's a lot harder to get emotionally involved in support of your client when he mentions that. And more specifically to the case, if you're a cynic, you might have asked, was he drunk driving that night he decided to lead the cops on a car chase? So I asked, and he said, well, I had one drink at 8 p.m., but this was 2 a.m., so honestly it had to have been out of my system. Great. And then the summer intern said, were you on anything else at the time? Oh, I'd done some coke and heroin that night. Jesus, dude. You didn't feel like volunteering that earlier when we asked about the alcohol? But more to the point, if he was on all these drugs, how does he remember all these beatings from years before? He did not have any other witnesses who would speak on his behalf. Anyway, we got him a nice settlement, probably nicer than he deserved, and forgot about him. I looked him up a year or two later, and he was on the state's most wanted list. And honestly, I don't even want to know. I had to litigate for a stripper who sprained her ankle at a party. She was seeking compensation for her medical bills as well as punitive damages. It sounds ridiculous at first, but if you saw this dude's house, you would have been like, oh man. The dude waxed everything in his house so that the stripper's reflection would be all over the place. The moment she stepped into his abode, she sprained both her ankles, and she was wearing heels. Before I became an attorney, actually. I'm from a pretty small town. Through a connection of my parents, I was able to shadow the district attorney for a summer during college. I expected to be going to an awful lot of DUI, statutory assault, and burglary trials, since that's most of what showed up in the police blotter. The night before I was to start, I went to bed very early. What can I say? I was excited. My parents were on vacation, and I was just home with my big brother. After I had been asleep for a short time, my brother came into my room. The phone is for you. It's the police. Hi, OP. It's the insert district attorney name here. I know you're not starting with us until tomorrow, but how would you like to get started tonight? Wear jeans and boots if you have them. I didn't even really say anything to my brother. I just got changed quickly and went to the police station. Turns out a woman in a town had set her home on fire with her 2 children inside, offing both of them. I was up all night with the DA during the initial investigation. He took me to the home. I had to climb up a ladder and onto the roof to get into the girl's bedroom. They shared a room, but had separate beds. I was told by the police that, when they found them, they were in the same bed, meaning they were awake when the house was on fire, and crawled into bed together, terrified. The neighbor was a police officer, and he saw the house was on fire, ran to try and get help, and was told by the mother that the kids were still inside. He couldn't get in to save them, and was just devastated. The rest of the day is a blur, an exhausting and traumatizing blur. I went to the autopsies, I got dizzy, and had to leave the room. Honestly, the case was so devastating that I tried to wipe it out and didn't follow it much once I went back to college. A quick search tells me the mom pled out to avoid the death penalty, which I knew the DA was going to fight for. She'll be in prison for the rest of her life. That's the end of today's video. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Remember to interact and share the video so I actually get seen by YouTube. Anyway, I will see you all next time. Hasta la pasta.